All right, what I'd like to do now is my Karmic Autobiography. And no, I was not Gilgamesh, so I have this up for a different reason. So far as I know, I'm the first to do this. I don't know of anyone else who has done a Karmic Autobiography because it takes years of work and conversations with various mediums. Most people are afraid to talk to mediums, either because they feel gullible or it's just too woo-woo. I have no trouble at all. They don't intimidate me whatsoever, and I get along with them just fine. So over about, this research has extended about 7 years now, and I've talked to maybe 20 different mediums. I have a current one that I like very much, an Indian medium, who has been helping me with some of these details. And so as far as they have told me, I've had about 800 lifetimes, and I'm about roughly midway through my incarnation, so I would expect another 800. So an average karmic cycle might be 2,000 lifetimes, give or take. It depends. Some people are more spiritually precocious than others, and those are the ones who undertake very difficult lives because it accelerates your karma. The easy lives, when people incarnate as celebrities or porn stars or rock stars, those are either souls who have just come out of very difficult lives and are on vacation, or they are still just immature young souls who are all about the senses and being in beautiful bodies and so forth. Gradually over time you get over that, and that's all about service to self. When you get about midway to your incarnations, the axis, what you might call in astrology the Aries versus Libra axis. Aries is the ego, the self, one's relation to oneself, and Libra is one's one-on-one relations with other people. But you might say that the earlier incarnations are tilted more towards service to self. Me, 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 me. That's what the celebrity is. The celebrity is all about him or herself. They could care less about anyone else. But then as you get midway into your incarnations, you've stopped resorting to violence to solve your problems. Then it starts to balance a bit more towards service to others as well as service to self, which is about sort of midway. And then in the later incarnations, which get harder because you voluntarily choose tougher ones, and it becomes more and more about service to others. Like, for example, the incarnation of a Jesus or a Rudolf Steiner or a Shri or a Bindo. Those guys are all about service to others. So, all right, so there's a few lifetimes here. Maybe 10 or 12 we'll go through. And so now I wrote a book a ways back called Rage on the Word on Gilgamesh, Akhenaten, and Moses and the birth of the metaphysical age. That was a book I wrote probably 10 or 12 years ago, something like that. And I have been very fascinated with Gilgamesh. It is my all-time favorite work of literature. I've read it in 15 or so different translations and wrote a novel, my own popularization, a novelization of Gilgamesh. And so there's fascination there. And now what I've learned is that normally when a writer is fascinated with a particular historical epoch, it's because they lived there. They were alive. They were incarnate at that time. And as it turns out, I asked the medium about Gilgamesh, and she said, yes, you were incarnate as one of his lovers. You were a female, one of his lovers, but a woman who wasn't an idiot. The history books don't record her, whatever her name was, because she had some political power in the city of Uruk. This is 2600 BC. So that explains my fascination with Gilgamesh. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this next one's going to be a bit controversial. It took me by surprise. So this would be the boy prince Tutankhamun. Now I remember when, now this explains my fascination with Akhenaten, because Akhenaten was his father, and I've written a sort of biographical essay about Akhenaten in that book, Rage in the Word, and he's one of my absolute all-time favorite characters in history. So if I was his son, Tutankhamun, because he had mostly girls, he had a gaggle of girls, 5 or 6 of them. Poor kid must have been overwhelmed with their power. And he dies, I believe, at 17 or 18 years old. So he didn't live very long, but he was a spoiled brat. He got everything he wanted. So he had a simple, easy life. And the medium said the next life afterwards was a life that he chose voluntarily of poverty, another Egyptian lifetime, only in the next time of poverty. Because there's something I call the law of karmic balancing, whereby if you go too far in one lifetime, you're going to have to balance it. Maybe not the next lifetime or the one after that, but coming up along the ways. If you've been a porn star, let's say, eventually you're going to reincarnate as a nun or a priest to balance the karma. That's the way karma works. And so Tutankhamun, this took me by surprise, and I'm very reluctant to sort of unveil this to the public. I actually don't know that much about Tutankhamun because when I was studying Akhenaten, it was all about Akhenaten. I was just sort of peripherally aware of Tutankhamun, so I don't know that much about him. I haven't read biographies specifically about him. When I convert these videos into a book and fill in all the detail, I'll go back and read the biographies of all these people. Some of them I just haven't read biographies. In fact, most of them. But so I said to the medium, nobody's ever going to believe me. And she said, it doesn't matter what they believe. It won't change the fact that you were Tutankhamun. So interesting. The boy king. Okay. Weird. So there's a gap. I had one medium was vaguely telling me I had some sort of incarnation during the Crusades. I was killed in battle at a very young age, like about 20 years old. But I was having a love affair with a woman who was twice my age. She was in her 40s. She is the girlfriend that keeps reincarnating with me, the one that committed suicide not that long ago. About, 3 or 4 years ago? 2019. And so she was the older woman, and she was married at the time, and we were having an affair, and she refused to leave her husband. And so I went off on one of these crusades, and I was killed at a very young age, about 20. So we don't know, we don't have the date yet. I might use another medium to find out and narrow it down and see. But then the next one, and it's a big one, John Dee. Now, I remember first announcing this, and it was very controversial on Facebook about 4 or 5 years ago when I first announced it. Oh yeah, like you were John Dee. Well, actually I was, because you see, I have talked to about 7 different mediums about this, and they all agree. When you get that many mediums agreeing, you can pretty much write it down as actual fact. For me, in order to confirm these lifetimes, I have to have at least 3 separate mediums who aren't connected with each other and all agree. So they all agreed that I was John Dee. As my current medium said, this was one of your most important lifetimes. So he was born in 1527 and died around 1608 or 9. He was a very left-brain thinker. Unlike myself in this incarnation, I'm a right-brainer this time. He was a very left-brain thinker, an astronomer, an astrologer. He correctly predicted when Queen Elizabeth would ascend the throne, and consequently she let him out of jail. Mary had put him in jail, and she let him out, and he became a star. He was a huge celebrity at her court. Not only that, but Dee imported the entire Hermetic tradition from the continent, from the Italian and French versions of it that had been going on there, and brought it to England. And it became, the cosmology that he created became the cosmology that was taken for granted by all the Elizabethan poets and playwrights, including Shakespeare, Sir Philip Sidney in particular, and also Edmund Spenser, the author of The Fairy Queen. They all worshipped this guy, and Shakespeare paid a tip of homage to him when he based the character of Prospero in The Tempest on him. Now also Christopher Marlowe specifically wrote Dr. Faustus about John Dee in order to defame him. There were these tendencies going back and forth in the Elizabethan court between Elizabeth being interested in the occult, and she very much liked the Monus Hieroglyphica that Dee wrote and gave to her, which became a huge foundational text for the inspiration for the Rosicrucians when this tradition went back to the continent and hit Germany a couple of decades later. Then it became the foundation of the basic Rosicrucian manifestos, the Fama and the Confessio, and and then of course the big one, the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, the first chapter of which begins, it shows you this symbol here, the Monus Hieroglyphica, which is absolutely spectacular. I have a video on this, if you want to look this up on YouTube, that talks about some of the symbolism in the Monus Hieroglyphica. And so, but then there was a witch hunting tendency. Marlowe was on that side, as James Stewart was later. He was a witch hunter as well. So it's a good thing he wasn't around. I think, well, maybe he was, I think James had already ascended the throne. Maybe it's 02 that he ascends the throne. But that coincides with Dee falling out of favor because he went to the continent, went on a tour with his medium, Edward Kelly, and their wives. They also engaged in wife swapping on a regular basis while on this tour. They confessed that. It's actually in one of their writings. And they went to the court of Rudolf II, the emperor, the Austro-Hungarian emperor there of the Holy Roman Empire, who was fascinated with the occult and was importing figures from Italy and from England. Giordano Bruno at one point was there, and they missed each other. When Dee was on the continent, Giordano Bruno went to England. He didn't get a very good reception there, rather. So I don't know if Dee ever met Bruno, but he was wise to stay away from the church and to stay away from Italy. And Bruno went back to Italy, and they burned him alive for actually saying the correct cosmology, namely that the universe is infinite, which it actually turns out to be. The church was dead wrong. So the church is done. We're free of that ridiculous world. It's over. Its days are finished. All that shame and shame about the body and the fear of the genitals, all this ridiculous nonsense. You have to consider that Christianity was put together by celibate monks, probably a lot of them incels who could not get women, and they translated that frustration into theology, as St. Augustine did when he said that a woman is a temple built above a sewer. So that's what we get. You get a religion of repressed men. And then you get Christianity. So Dee's whole synthesis, though, was based, he was a Christian, was a believer, but it was not orthodox. It was a synthesis of the Hermetic tradition along with Christianity. That's what he was trying to do, and it was very successful. He fell out of favor when he went back to England. Queen Elizabeth wanted nothing to do with him, gave him a frosty welcome, and he died in poverty. But he was in his 70s, I believe, 81 actually. So he had a long life. And a number of traits from him have carried over into my present personality, such as the interest in astrology, one of the mediums pointed out, and some other things that I won't get into. Okay, then I asked this current medium, who was John Dee next after this then? And she says, this figure here, Maria Sibylla Merian, she's German, 1647 to January 13th, 1717 rather. So she was a German entomologist and a natural scientist. Unlike Dee was interested in very masculinist, Platonic, abstract cosmologies, mathematical cosmologies that are sort of out there. They're not Mother Earth cosmologies, whereas it's clear that he felt he needed to incarnate as a woman and then to ground himself in the study of biology. Which is what natural science was called back in the 17th century. It was biology, basically. And she was a famous illustrator, too. Her face even resembles mine a bit there, and it looks familiar. When I first saw the faces of each one of these people, not Tutankhamun, but with Dee, I got a shock of recognition. There's something familiar there. Same thing with Maria Sibylla. I've seen that face before, even though I haven't. But it's a feeling of familiarity. And so she has all these, she did all these illustrations. She has a book on metamorphosis that precedes Goethe's work on metamorphosis, but I think hers is on the metamorphosis of insects. Goethe did some work on that too, and I wouldn't be surprised if Goethe didn't know of her work. He probably did. These are all her illustrations, these works of art here. She might have had a woo-woo aura to her because of her house was loaded with all these kinds of insects and herbs and all this kind of stuff, which kind of felt maybe kind of witch-like. So people might have muttered, going down the street that, the witch lives over there, the witch lady, perhaps. I don't think she was persecuted or anything like that. Now, the next lifetime after Maria Sibylla was actually one of her granddaughters, and I don't know which one yet. I'm going to try to narrow it down. There's four of them. Let's see, four granddaughters. Let's see if I can find them here. It doesn't matter that much. It's not a granddaughter that was notable. We just know the names of her four granddaughters. But I don't think except one daughter took up her illustrating and went to the continent and was invited, I think, somewhere, really famous. I've forgotten where. But anyhow, so the next incarnation, there might have been one in between this one in the 18th century that I don't know much about, that I think I remember a medium saying it wasn't anybody historically famous, but the girlfriend reappeared as an aristocrat, and I was a delivery man, making deliveries to the palace, and then she had to have me, and so we had a torrid affair. And as the one of the mediums said, she used and abused you. Later, she had her head chopped off. So I don't know who she was. Seems like it has to be someone in the 18th century, because I've been averaging about one incarnation per century, which I think most of us have. There are, let's see, who is it who said, the guy Newton, I think it was Michael Newton, the guy puts people under hypno-regression so that they can remember their past lives, says that incarnations have been increasing. As the population has expanded more and more, it gives more and more souls more and more opportunities for more and more incarnations. Whereas he thinks before the past few centuries, incarnations were much more infrequent. It might have started off like one every 500 years, and then that interval got shorter, one every couple of centuries. And now, clearly, it's been one a century, and I think most people, it's probably accelerated that way right now because we have so many available bodies. So there might have been that one. And then, so then the Civil War guy here, he was a Confederate Army officer, so he was on the South, but he had sympathies for the North. There's a biography of this guy. There might even be two of them, but I haven't read them yet. John Adams. There again, when I saw his photograph, I got a shock of recognition. There's something familiar there. It's like I've seen that face before. And so we narrowed it down. Several mediums had told me that I was in the Civil War as one of the generals there, but it was a brigadier general, not one of the big famous generals. But this guy, this might have been my first taste of the American Southwest, because this guy participated in the Mexican-American War, which is 1846 to 1848, down south of the border there, before the Gadsden Purchase. That came later, I think, in 1854 maybe, where they bought the land south of Phoenix, the area that covers Tucson and Yuma. That might have been his first taste of the Southwest. Maybe he liked it, because then he had to go back and fight in the Civil War, where he dies in 1864 in Franklin, Tennessee. There's a battle there, I've forgotten what it was, where he was shot a bunch of times, and he fell, and his horse fell on him. That may be why I'm claustrophobic, by the way. I have claustrophobia. It may come from that. But they got the horse off of him and dragged him over to die. He just died he bled out, I guess, at the age of 39. Now, there's a complication here that comes in. So his dates are 1825 to 1864. So he dies at 1864. But now the current medium tells me that I did something that's known as a walk-in, which is a concept that's new to me and still kind of hard to grasp, where one soul walks into a body that's already up and running and has already had another soul in it for a while, but apparently you can do this. So she says, I walked in to an Indian mystic named Sai Baba of Shirdi. He was born in 1838. As we have seen, John Adams was born in 1825, but he died in 1864. Now, my guess for this, I don't know much about Sai Baba. I don't think he was a philosopher, but he's revered as a saint and a guru. I do remember one medium asking her, who was I before John Adams, or about the same time, and she said, you were a pauper, which is why you're not impressed by money. She might have been referring to this guy and just didn't know it, because the medium I'm with now is very, very good. There's no uncertainties with her. She knows what she's doing. There's not a lot of stumbling and feeling around in the dark. So yeah, I've never read about this guy. I haven't even seen a video about him. But so the way I'm piecing this together then is that it must have occurred on his Saturn return. So you get the Saturn return, and this would have been for him 1868. So he was born in 1838, 48, 58, 68. I've already died 4 years before that, so that might have been the point, because Saturn returns are always big threshold crossings, where I entered into him, and I was inside of his body driving that car basically for 30 years. So for another Saturn cycle, and then I left him. 48, 58, 68, 78, 88, 98. So I'm done with him on his second Saturn return. I've achieved whatever it is I was going to do. So then I reincarnate as my great-grandfather. Here he is, Samuel Miller Wagonseller, who was born on December 25th in 1902. And all the mediums are very certain about this. They all agree that it's not a maybe. And he dies March 18th, 1967 in Phoenix. And then I was born a year later, June 26th, in Phoenix in 1968. So there was a little gap there. He looks a lot like I looked when I was his age there. Not so much later on. He gained some weight here. There's not much resemblance later on, but I did look quite a bit like him there. I even wore similar spectacles with round lenses like that when I was about 20. Now, why he chose to reincarnate in his own granddaughter's womb, I asked the medium that, and she said it was just convenient. It was kind of like any port in a storm. It just made sense. So, okay, and so he is 1902, like, okay, and then down to 1967. All right, and then so we have some newspaper clippings. My brother and I have saved them from his career. This guy was something else. He was a surgeon, and he went to Johns Hopkins. Here in 1942, he's made a captain, so he's in the Army. Dr. Samuel Wagenseller, a Decatur surgeon. So he's born in Decatur, Illinois. But keep in mind that he died in Phoenix. So it might have been that John Adams had already gotten the taste for the American Southwest, and that may have been what unconsciously drove Dr. Wagenseller to move there, where he died. And so he's a graduate of Johns Hopkins, so this guy ain't no joke. University Medical College in 1931. At this point, he's a captain. And then here we have him. A year later, in 1943, he's promoted to major. And he's getting ready to go into the war, World War II. He is now in desert training near Yuma, Arizona. So they sent him to Yuma to get training, more training, to go into the war. Where he did, he went into the war as a MASH unit, where he operated on soldiers. Here's another promotion: accepts position as technician. Back to Decatur, Macon County Hospital, and so forth. These are further back. 26 at Johns Hopkins. Okay, one of 73 students admitted this year for MD degree. So this guy was an overachiever. And now the karma makes a lot of sense to me that he's been a soldier. In the previous lifetime, he was in battle, killing people. So now by the law of karmic balancing, he has to make up for that by entering into war, not to kill people, but to repair their wounds. So you can see the karmic balancing there. Hopefully I'm done with any kind of lifetimes that have anything to do with violence. That should be all done. Violence is repugnant to me. But let's take a look at our two astro charts, because you can see that the law of karmic balancing at work, because it has to do with the moon's nodes. These are the moon's nodes, and because the moon, as it goes around the zodiac, is slightly tilted with respect to the ecliptic, it has a north point where it enters it and a south point where it enters it. And those points have to do with karma. Now this is the south node, which has to do with karma that you're bringing in with you from a previous lifetime. And the north node is where you're trying to get to. So he has come from Aries, a lifetime maybe with an emphasis on ego. One of the mediums said about John Adams, it was kind of funny. She said he was kind of a dick, wasn't he? So that may have been he's coming from a major emphasis on ego. And then here in his lifetime, it's more about the balance between service to self and service to others by being a surgeon, a doctor, healing wounds, and so forth. So that makes plenty of sense. But then now note where he's left. So we're at 21 degrees, Aries, Libra. When we get to my chart, Aries and Libra, where are they? Here they are. Here are the nodes. They're conjunct. 14 degrees, not 21, but 14 is close enough for a conjunction. And now it's the north node that's headed in the direction of Aries. And see, it's come from already from Libra. So the nodes work. They do have to do with karma. And those astrologers, like Rob Hand, I think, who doesn't have a reincarnation in his paradigm, they have no idea what to make of the nodes. And I remember him shrugging in horoscope symbols. Same thing with Reinhold Ebertine. As great as he is, he does not understand the nodes at all. They have to do with karma. He's got them having to do with groups, collective group activity, and all of this kind of nonsense. No, it's karma. And as you can see here, I have my Saturn is 24 degrees, which would be conjunct over here with his south node, which is 21 degrees. And notice too that he has this huge stellium of planets in Capricorn and in Aquarius, whereas mine are all over here, the exact opposite. They're all in Cancer. I have a huge stellium here that extends through Gemini with Mercury, and then Mars, Sun, Venus, Moon, part of Fortune. A huge spread there, exactly opposing his stellium here that's spread across Aquarius to Sagittarius. Now note too, for surgeons, I've learned that Chiron, you have to pay attention to Chiron, even though it's a dwarf planet. And so far, there's 20 or 30 dwarf planets. A lot of them don't have names. Their archetypes will need to be figured out by future astrologers. And Chiron is the smallest, but nonetheless, it works. Chiron has to do with healing. It's the centaur, the Greek centaur, who taught medicine. And I went to an astrological conference where we looked at the birth charts of a whole bunch of doctors and healers, the founder of the Red Cross, Edgar Cayce, who healed people like Reiki mystically, things like that. And they always have Chiron in aspect with Jupiter. Here, they're 3 degrees apart. Jupiter expands and accentuates anything that it gets near. Or if Jupiter isn't near Chiron, it'll be angular. It'll be on one of the angles. We don't have his angles here because we don't know the time of his birth. And it's there with, also note the scalpel there with Saturn. Saturn has that scythe. Saturn likes to cut things. This is the astro chart of a surgeon. There's no question about that. Mercury with Venus, intelligence about the female body. At one point, he was a gynecologist. He had a little gynecology operation there. That's interesting. Lilith is a debility, so that's difficult. Even though he had such a smooth and easy career, because Capricorn has to do with the outer world of your career. But we don't know for sure because we don't have the midheaven, and the midheaven has to do with career. So we don't know for sure where we're at here in terms of the orientation. And Uranus is there, very intelligent, bright individual with Uranus close to a conjunction with the Sun, close enough. And let's see the Moon over here with a square to Jupiter. Sun is in opposition to Neptune. You would expect him to be open to spiritual energies, but I don't think that he was. And I think that Neptune instead played itself out in the form of addiction because he was an alcoholic. Although he was a functioning alcoholic. I recall my grandmother telling me stories about how he would pull the blinds down at 5 p.m. when he got home, and his wife had the supper waiting for him. And then he would drink hard liquor until he collapsed. She would drag him off to bed. Then he'd get up at 5 a.m. and go and do surgery. That's a functional alcoholic. That's pretty amazing. He was also a womanizer, though. So he was cheating on her on a regular basis, including with the girlfriend. I think her name John Adams was also cheating on his wife with the girlfriend, the one that I keep reincarnating with. And she always turns up in the role of some sort of seductress, an adulteress. I usually cheat on whoever I'm with her. And so her name would have been Liza in the time of John Adams, and he was cheating on his wife with her. And then I've forgotten what her name was in this particular incarnation. It was also a kind of rustic-sounding name. I wrote it down somewhere. Okay, and that's my most recent incarnation as my own great-grandfather. And so now it's just me. All right, I'll end there. I know I've talked about my birth chart in other videos, but that's my first rough draft shot at a karmic autobiography, and this may be the inception of a brand new genre. No one else has done this. And over the years, I'll just refine it and find out more lifetimes. If I've had 800 of them, there might be more notable people in there somewhere. You just got to dig. Mediums don't give you information. You have to fish it. You have to give them, who was I in the time of Gilgamesh? Who was I in the time of Akhenaten? They need context. They can't just fish it out of the ether. Oh, you were this guy, that guy, and the other guy. It involves some work, some digging around. But that's it so far. So that's my karmic autobiography. So I'll end there. I do astrology readings, by the way, for anyone interested. I still do them. Hit me up at johndavidebert@gmail.com for that.